Google has banned all political ads ahead of the federal election in Canada, citing new transparency rules. So we'll read through this, but apparently a restriction has been placed on how ads can be bought and sold, and Google has to be transparent about this, but because they can't actually track every single advertisement, welcome to the new world, they decided to outright ban them. The reason, this is a really important concept when we talk about Section 230 privacy banning. I don't know where the conversation earlier today went, and I'm not going to say exactly what the conversation was in case for some reason this video, I don't know, leaks before I do the what I'm going to do later. But there was recently, the U.S. passed something called SESTA and FOSTA. I think that's what it was. And what they said was Section 230, which protects Twitter from liability for the things other people say. So if you say something on Twitter, you can't sue Twitter. If Twitter curates its content, that's not making it a publisher, they're protected. But they added a rule that said you can't have sex trafficking on your platforms. You will not be exempt from liability in that case, so potentially criminal prosecution. What ends up happening is a lot of social media sites outright banned what they would call like borderline content. So, cartoons, hentai, things like that were all immediately purged from, like Patreon, and Twitter was heavy-handed, but Twitter still allows a lot of this stuff on their platform. The idea being, because they can't prove which content is trafficking and which is consensual, ban all of it. And this is the danger of overregulation. So coming off of a conversation about censorship on social media, I want to make sure we keep this in mind when we talk about regulation. If these social media platforms, Google, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, etc., if they don't solve the problem, then we're going to see people demand regulation, and if it's not done right, it could purge everything. So let's read the story and see what's going on with Google in Canada. Google is banning political advertising on its platforms ahead of the Canadian federal election because of the new ad transparency rules it says would be too challenging to comply with. The decision comes in response to the Liberals' signature election measure, Bill C-76, which passed in December. Among other things, it requires online platforms to keep a registry of all political and partisan ads they directly or indirectly publish. The penalties for not doing so includes fines and possible jail time. Let's try to make this a little bigger. Maybe too big. We've come to the decision that the best way for Google to comply with the Elections Act in the 2019 election cycle is actually to stop accepting election ads as defined in the legislation, said Colin McKay, Google Canada's head of public policy and government relations. It is painful for us. The bill's advertising transparency requirements come into force on June 30th or sooner if an early election is called. This isn't a negotiating tactic, Mr. M. What? Oh, it's weird. Mr. McKay added, we are 4 months out from the period prescribed in legislation. To enforce its ban, Google will modify its ad policies and system to block advertisers from running ads that fall under the definition set out by C-76. Other Google services, such as enhanced search results and platform, including YouTube, will still be available during the campaign period. Aside from the ad registry requirement, Google also expressed concerns about how it would detect ads of a partisan nature, which may not specifically mention a candidate or party by name. The challenge for us is that definition is extremely broad. Democratic Institutions Minister Karina Gold said the decision was very disappointing in an emailed statement. Google's decision to opt out of political advertising during the regulated period appears to have been made for business reasons and does not reflect on the quality of our laws, which are designed to protect Canadian voters and our elections. We know that Google is enormously capable both technically and financially, Ms. Gold said. It should apply these resources to producing a registry in Canada that complies with Canadian laws. But you can't force a business to do it, right? So I also want to point out as well, I think they mentioned other Google services such as YouTube will still be available. So there's good news for those YouTubers based in Canada. You will likely not lose ad revenue over this. However, I find it particularly interesting when we see comments like this. Government often does, this is not true, this is true beyond government, people typically look for the simple solution to their problems. Okay, we've got political campaign ads, and we want to make sure people aren't cheating, so we need transparency. All right, let's pass a law saying transparency for these companies. Admittedly, I don't know exactly how this law works, but I want to make a point. Google's response isn't what you would expect. They assumed that Google would apply its resources to producing a registry. No. Google says, okay, well, that seems burdensome. We'd rather just not have ads. Gone. And it's similar to what we see with like increasing minimum wage. I am for increasing minimum wages when technology permits. So I'm a centrist, right? So the general idea is, yes, we want to make sure we're continually standardizing increasing the standard of living for everybody, and minimum wages can do that. Not if technology does not permit. You end up getting people fired, like we're seeing in other places. Or in this particular instance, they think that this simple solution will solve their problem. In reality, sometimes the solution is counterintuitive, but at the same time, too often, government just assumes if we snap our fingers in this way, we'll solve the problem. And that brings me back to the issue of social media and censorship. You have so these far-left activists, they're freaking out because they think there's a rise in fascism. Well, this insane narrative is abetted by a media that wants to push that narrative in exchange for traffic to sell advertisements. It's terrifying. I mention this often. Vox ran an article, VOX, claiming that 11 million people in the US held alt-right views, which is just an absurd exaggeration based on misleading poll question. People then fall for this stuff. They go crazy. They demand Twitter take action. So what does Twitter do? Twitter says, okay, we're going to start banning anybody who holds these views and expresses them. Does that solve the problem of a perceived increase in fascists? It doesn't. It actually makes the problem worse. Because as I've explained time and time again, those people will then, you ban everyone from Twitter of varying ideologies, right? You have Meghan Murphy, who is a feminist, who is a radical feminist who is gender critical. They ban her from Twitter for misgendering. What does she do? Well, now all of a sudden she has conservatives propping her up. You didn't do away with her opinion. You've actually helped embolden conservatives' view that the left is crazy, or that this element of the left is crazy, and actually aligned them with LGBT activists and gender critical feminists. So you end up making the problem worse. The solution to your problem isn't always obvious. It's like a Chinese finger trap. I call it a Chinese finger trap problem. You have to push in, and then your fingers can come out. But when you do the obvious and try to pull your fingers out, it gets tighter and you make the problem worse. And here we can see, this is actually a really good example of a few different circumstances. One, Canada trying to enforce a rule thinking the simple solution was the obvious one, and two, the negative response from a business when they're forced to undertake action. So you want them to abide by these rules. They have no obligation to. They can just stop. They can just shut down the business, and now you are without. And what do? Now they complain about it. Too bad. Free enterprise is under no obligation to adapt to new rules. They can simply shut their company down. And this goes into another conversation where you have like unionizing. These people at these media companies want to unionize because they think they deserve more money when the company isn't making money. So what happens? Okay, business shuts down. You have now exceeded the cost risk, the cost benefit ratio. And people don't seem to understand this, particularly on the left. But let's read through the story. The internet giant first spoke publicly about C76 in November in a presentation to a Senate committee. Google warned the bill's requirements of online platforms were too onerous and they would be extremely difficult for the company to comply with. The presentation included marked up versions of Bill C76, indicating which sections Google wanted removed or edited. Because of how Google's advertising systems work, the company argued it doesn't know which ads get displayed, making a registry impossible. Mr. McKay said a change would require significant resources. In Google's system, ads can be targeted to users in an automated way, often through a real-time bidding process. When users visit a web page, as the page loads, their profile is shared with an advertising exchange, such as Google's AdX platform. Though through that exchange, the web page's publisher then auctions off the ads that will be shown to those users. Finally, the winning bidder displays an ad to the user. The entire process often lasts less than 0.2 of a second. It's pretty damn crazy, actually. Under the system, Google argues, the publisher may not know which ads were displayed. Similarly, the advertising exchange itself may not know which ad was shown, only that one advertiser beat out another during the auction. In cases where advertisers are running dozens or hundreds of advertising campaigns at once, this wouldn't be enough information to build the legally mandated registry. Google is one of the world's largest digital advertising companies. Its ad exchanges and ad delivery systems power a significant portion of all internet advertising. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time getting in the nitty gritty of this. It's kind of boring, but I want to make a few important points about Citizens United, the future of ad spends. We have restrictions on how money is spent in elections. Facebook, Google, and these companies have no obligation to continue allowing those ads to exist if you're requiring them to make those, as I've pointed out. But it also gets really interesting then when you can see where will these politicians then advertise. If you can't do it on Google, where do you do it? Well, YouTube still exists. That's a good thing. But there's an important point to bring up, to be brought up on Citizen United, as the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur and others are trying to combat Citizen United. Now, for me, I'm in opposition to that ruling, because you end up with you end up with super PACs and unlimited resources funneling towards certain politicians, and that's terrifying. But what's important to recognize on the other side of things is, if we restrict all spends, period, on directly supporting a candidate, what's going to stop CNN and other major billion-dollar news ventures from just choosing who they report on and who they prop up? No matter what, you can't end this. And so it seems like maybe that's the only outcome. I don't know. What I can say is this is a really good example of the Chinese finger trap problem. Google wanted transparency. You get the opposite. You get no ads on Google, period. But we'll see how this plays out. Stick around. I've got one more video. I think I've got one more video coming up in a few minutes, and I will see you then.